Your application may need global settings. These are typically stored in the configuration file and loaded at startup time. These settings affect the entire application regardless of who is using the application on the local computer. You may also want to store user-specific settings. Each user on the local computer would get their own copy of the configuration value. .NET has a configuration API, and Visual Studio gives you an editing tool to make it simple to access this configuration API. I have opened a project called Settings Demo. It contains 3 projects. I'm going to start by looking in Simple Console. Simple Console has no settings at this moment. To add a setting to this application, I can double-click on Properties and then go to the Settings tab. Visual Studio is telling me that this project doesn't contain a default settings file. I'm going to click on this hyperlink to add one. I want you to see what happened over here. The Properties node now has a settings.settings item added here, and underneath that is a settings.designer.cs. Here I can create brand new settings. I'm going to type a new setting value here. Call this one template location. And that's going to be a string, and the scope for that is going to be an application-wide setting. Down here, I'm going to add a help website. And then, of course, I can add some default strings over here. So I could come over here and type in HTTP : like so. Now I want you to see what was written for me. There's a new app config over here that didn't exist before. This app config will be compiled and saved with my exe, and when my application starts up, it'll read the contents of this app config. Let me show you what's inside the app config. There's now a new application settings in here, and then there's a template location setting with no current value in it, and a help website setting with the string I added a few minutes ago as the value. These are read once when the application starts up. If you make any changes, they won't be read by your application until you shut down the application and restart it. Also notice that over here in the Properties window, under Settings, Designer, Visual Studio is automatically creating some code on my behalf. It created a property called template location, and it's a read-only property. And it created a property called help website. Now, if I come back to this and I add a user setting, let me go back and double-click on settings.setting. And I say that's a user-specific setting. There's a new section called User Settings, and it's added this section down here. Now, this can be a read and write setting. It's stored here, but when you save the file, it's going to create a copy for each user and store their user-specific settings in a user-identified folder. To show you that, I'm going to move to this other application, Settings Demo. I'm going to choose Window, Close All Documents. And then I'm going to move into Settings Demo. This is my startup project. Here I'm going to run some code to read the settings. The data is accessible in those classes that were created automatically for me. I access that by using properties.settings, then I use the default keyword, and then the name of the settings. Now you're probably asking yourself, where did the user age property come from? Well, it's over here in that settings area. Inside this project, there is a username, which is a scope user, and a user age, which is an integer data type. And down here is a max app file, which is a long data type, and a color, and so on. I'm able to access those data through this class. So I'm going to read the values down here and store them in the console's foreground color. And then I'm going to print out the user's age and the maximum files. Then I'm going to show you the location of where those files are stored. So I already have a breakpoint in here. I'll press F5 to run the application. It hits my breakpoint. I then press F11 to step through the code. Here I'm reading the settings. The user console setting is green. No, I don't want to continue to be notified of this automatic step over. Thank you very much. And then this shows the location. So my settings are being saved in the Walt Richer folder, app data, local. If you were to go over to that folder, there's a configuration file sitting there with the XML that's being saved. Next, we'll step out and then we're going to save the settings. Press F11 to step in here. I'm going to write a new age value. And then the way you save to that configuration file is by calling the save method on that auto-generated class. And then down here, we're going to read those settings again. And now the default age for the user will be 31. Started out as 0 and it ended up at 31. I'd like to show you one other place these settings are used in Visual Studio. That's going to be in this Windows Forms application. I'm going to make this my startup project. And then I'm going to open up the Form Designer here. And then I'm going to show you what happens when I run the application. I'm going to press F5 to run the application. I'm going to resize the app window and then close it. And then press F5 to rerun the application a second time. Notice that the form is the same size it was before. That looks like a good use of user settings to remember the size of this window. So the form editor has a simple way of storing this in those user settings. I just click on the form. I go to the top of this window and choose Application Settings. Choose a property binding. Pick something called the client size and say, I would like to create a new user setting. My client size. And the scope is user. And then OK. Now that's automatically generated my user settings. Now when I press F5, it'll run the application. It starts out at the default size. I make it slightly larger. When I close it, it's going to automatically save it to my user settings. And then next time I run the application, it remembers my size. As you can see, it is very easy to work with the settings editor in Visual Studio. Under the covers, it's really generating a helper class on my behalf so that I don't have to learn the complexities of the .NET configuration library.